Okay, so welcome again, everyone, to this introduction to systems change presentation. My name is Yasmin, and alongside my colleague, Joss Colchester, we're going to host and facilitate today's session on behalf of the SI London Hub. This is a series that we're creating called the Systems Innovation Learning Series, and this is one event in this series. I'm going to share the structure of this program in a bit. But if you want to access more information and to see what's coming up, then you have the article here that you can access just clicking on the link here on the corner of this writing here. So you can just click here and see more details on this learning series, okay? So some features of today's session. This is going to be a 90 minutes event. This is being recorded at the moment, and you can access that afterwards on our YouTube channel that I will put the link on the end of this presentation. And yeah, you're always welcome to use the chat to address any questions or to comment that you think that it's relevant for what you're speaking about. And yeah, we're more than happy to check that out for you. Okay, so as I said, this is the structure of the learning series that we are organizing that we started on February 15th. And now we're on May 10th talking about systems change. And this is a module that we're going to start today with an introduction. Next week, we're going to cover some tools on systems change at the same time at 5 p.m. UK and the same Zoom link. And the third session on this module is going to be a case study where we're going to bring a professional, someone that is using some of these tools and these concepts in their own work and sharing their experiential tacit knowledge with us here in this third event happening on May 24th. Okay, so before we begin our session today, just sharing, this is the resource that we're using for this session, and you can access this systems change guide here, clicking on this link on the top corner. I'm not sure if you can download here, but you can access that on this link right here on the top left, or top right, sorry. All right, so a bit of an icebreaker here so we can understand and get to know each other a bit better. Just to confirm, you all have the mirror board link, right? Can you access that correctly? I think, yeah, there's some people here. Great. So for the icebreaker, here we have some areas and some topics. And I would like to know which of these areas you are working in or interested in. And depending on your interest, you can click on one of these dots and drag to the ones that you're interested in understanding, learning, talking about. So get all these dots and put on the topics that you think are interesting for you. All right, in the meantime, I'll just check the board. In the meantime, more people are coming as well, and we can get started with our event very soon. Okay. All right, so what do we have here? So you're interested in thinking or systems thinking, governance, education, social topics, environment, organizations, This one is design. Okay, finance. That's great. Great. This is going to be very important for us for this session as well. But we can talk better about that later on when we actually are using the breakout rooms. Okay, so let's get started to our session. You're happy to just explore these topics afterwards, but we can get started on this part here. Yeah, so in this image here, you can put your stickies around. What do you think is happening here? There's a leaf, a caterpillar, a butterfly. What do you think is happening? So you can come here, use the sticky notes option on the left bar, and then click on this image, and then type what you think it's happening. So what is the word that comes to your mind when you see this image? Now I'll give you a few seconds for you to add your responses here. All right. So let me see some of the things that you've put here. Dynamic change, a life process, evolution, birth, transformation, process, transformation, metamorphosis, change, mutation, transformation. Let me see these little ones here. Transition, regenerative transformation, steps. Wow, big words. Great. Transformation, metamorphosis. Awesome. So here we can see that something is changing, right? And as you're saying with all these stickies here, something is changing or transforming. And in this process here, as we may know, there's a caterpillar that is transforming into a butterfly, right? And this is a process that the caterpillar starts here, and then it creates this cocoon around the caterpillar. So then something breaks from this cocoon, and then it happens to become a butterfly, right? The same caterpillar. So this is just a first exercise for us to think about change, since we're talking about systems change here, right? In our previous sessions, we've covered what is a system and some definitions around that. So here we're talking about transformation and change. So I'll give the floor to Joss so he can expand a bit more about this concept. What is a transformation, and why is it important to talk about it?
Great, thank you, Yasmin. It's great to be here with everyone. Thank you all for joining. My name's Joss. I'm with the SA London team and also SA core team, and happy to talk about systems change and this idea of transformation, transformative change. We'll be talking about it in a second, in contrast to more incremental forms of change. As the name implies, system change is about a change to the whole of a system, rather than any of the parts in it. And in that respect, it would be a change to the structure of that system and the way that system understands what it's trying to achieve, really, its goals, its understanding of itself, and so forth. And yeah, just in that respect, this example here of a transition from being a teenager to an adult. So I'd say there are a number of periods in our lives, and if you've lived long enough, you've probably been through one or two of these, which we would call transformative. We'd also say there are periods that are incremental. Being a child, or being a teenager, or being an adult is a paradigm. It's a certain kind of organization to our lives and ourselves and our understanding of ourselves and what we do. But then there are periods in that between those, when we go from being a teenager to an adult, when we go from being middle-aged to old age, we have these very interesting times of what we call transformational change or non-linear change. They aren't incremental. They aren't just one thing building upon another. We get that transformation in the actual nature and the way that the system is organized and thinking about itself. And on that note of thinking about itself, this one is a good example, a teenager to an adult. If we're successful in making that transformation, the way a teenager understands itself and who it is and its place in the world and what it's doing and what it's trying to achieve and how it organizes itself in terms of its messy room and all of this stuff is very different to that of an adult. If you're successful in becoming an adult, then you're probably going to have to work, right? You're going to have to pay the bills, and that's going to be a pretty much an organizing principle in your life, as opposed to the teenager who's showing up for a very different purpose and understands themselves and their place in the world very differently. So that's just one example. These transformations, they happen all around us. As biological entities, we're very much familiar with them because we see them across all kinds of biological systems, ecosystems. They go through periods of transformation or collapse. Societies, the Arab Spring, the fall of political regimes, these are periods of transformation. And they happen at all different scales, from the individual here to organizations, to societies, and even civilizations. If we think about the transition of modern Europe, right, from the Middle Ages and how that society was organized very differently. Think about it just politically. We had that feudal system of the kings and nobles and so forth. And ultimately, we ended up in the world we live in today of a democracy and so forth, where actually we start to understand what the political system is for very differently. Back then, it was about the kings and queens and nobles. Now it's about the people. So that's actually a very different way of understanding what that political system is about, and of course, then the way that we organize it. So that's what I mean by systems change. It's transformation from one way of organizing, one paradigm to another paradigm. Hopefully, those give you illustrations. Anybody want to think of another example of maybe a transformation of that kind? You can put a sticky up, you can unmute yourself. You can put it in the chat also. Any ideas? Transformational change.
So Eduardo is saying, understand itself reminds me of the quote, you can't make moves on the chessboard if you can't see the pieces.
Yeah.
I'd like to...
A sole trader to a publicly listed company. Yeah, that's a good example. Transformation education, how we learn nowadays, potentially. Okay, we'll stay going on to the next section. Okay, Airbnb, potentially. It's a change in the way that we're structuring that system of temporary accommodation. But there may be different, is Airbnb ultimately having different ends and different objectives than, say, the Hilton? You might argue at the end of the day, they're both just trying to make money for shareholders and so forth. So yes, it restructured the system. Perestroika, yep. The fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the communist system, rural urban ways of living. Well, that was part of like the transition to the modern era. We used to all live as peasants in the countryside. Now many of us live in cities in a very different way of existing. Social media and the life prior to it, and how we communicate and engage. Yeah, when I grew up in Ireland, there were just about 3 channels or 2 channels on television available to us, and that was pretty much it. There were national channels. We didn't get much news from outside Ireland, and now, yeah, we're bombarded by it. Transgender process, political, local, regional president. Great, thank you for that. Maybe zoom in a little bit, Yasmin, so we can take a look at what's going on here. So this is, one way of thinking about that, as noted, is contrasting it, this type of change, this transformational change, to linear change or incremental change. And incremental change is about changes in parts in a system, which is a lot of what we do. We often find it difficult to really get a view of the whole system. It's sometimes quite abstract for us. And then never mind understand that, but then how do we, if we do understand it, if we can get that vision, how would you actually go about changing it? It's not really a capacity we often see in individuals, in societies, in organizations. So a lot of what we do see is incremental change. That's quite intuitive to us as human beings. There are a lot of linear processes going on around us. If we think about walking to the shop, that's one step after another, and we'll get there. If the shop was twice as far away, we would take twice as many steps, and then we get there. So it's very much a linear process. But there are other processes, the transformational ones, which aren't like that. And maybe I like this analogy of the tree here and the DNA. That a tree has a DNA, and as it develops, it's going to express that DNA. And as it gets more resources and it iterates on that season after season, it's going to make incremental progress to becoming a larger pine tree, should we say. That's not the sort of change we're talking about, right? That would be, someone gave Airbnb as an example there. That would be the Hilton Hotel and it trying to, increase the number of rooms that it's renting out and so forth, and just trying to build upon that. But we could do, as Airbnb illustrated, the way we do personal accommodation could be very different. That system could be organized in a very different way. And they actually change kind of foundations of how we deliver that societal function of temporary accommodation. And if you want transformational change, it doesn't come by expressing the existing paradigm to a greater degree. It comes actually by having to go back to the original source and changing the source of that. So in earlier modules, we talked about the iceberg model. And if you're familiar with that, you have to go all the way down to the bottom of the iceberg and look at what is that DNA going on down here that's creating this system. And we need to change that DNA. And in the context of systems thinking and systems change, we recognize that as our ways of thinking and our ways of organizing. And you have to go down and really unpack that and reconsider your way of understanding a system and how it functions and its ways of organizing. If you change the DNA there, then over time that can be re-expressed as something quite radically new and different. We talked there about the fall of the Berlin Wall and the USSR. The pre-USSR system, the USSR system was based very much a political regime, and society was organized around that. When the Berlin Wall fell, places like Poland and other places in Eastern Europe opened up to the free market system. And a lot of the ways of advancing and getting ahead in that society is about winning in the free market system. And a new economic dimension came into those societies, and a new way of developing and so forth. A new paradigm, should we say. And those are some of the changes we're talking about when we say system change. It's about changing that kind of fundamental mental model, the DNA, so that over time the system can be expressed in a very different way.
Yeah, and I think one important thing to consider here as well is the quantity and the quality of the connections of the elements that are part of the system. So when we talk about more linear change, is about the quantity of the connections, right? You just have more parts interacting, but in the same way. Whereas when you're talking about structural change or nonlinear change, is the nature of these connections that change and not necessarily the parts itself.
Great. Very true. Someone was asking about a learning series. Is this part of a learning series? It is in the chat there. I've just posted the full series you'll be able to find at that link. Yeah, should we stay going, Yasmin?
Oh. Yeah, maybe we can go to the exercise.
Are there any questions at this time? Everybody happy with this idea of a structural change? Rather than changing parts, we're trying to change the structure of the system, the way it's organized, so that over time it'll express itself in radically different ways.
You can unmute yourself or put your hands up if you have any questions or comments as well. Makes sense for Eduardo.
Hey, this is Danielle. I guess I just wanted to repeat back what I'm hearing. So you're saying that systems change is more about the structural changes, that where you'll change the structures, and then over time there will be incremental change that will create the outcome that you're looking for from changing it structurally to begin with. The structural change will give way to incremental change. Is that what you're saying to get to the outcome?
No, the structural change will give way to, if you change something very fundamental, it may take time, but over time that will build to something transformative. And those transformations often happen very, very quickly. But then when you get to the other side, then you'll be back in another kind of linear regime. If we think about, say, the rise of the internet, the internet's been around since the 1960s or so. It took a very long time for that to grow, but now it's really broken since the 1990s. It's broken into modern society, and it's starting to reshape the way we do pretty much everything, our economy and so forth. And that's a pretty rapid exponential growth that's happening at this time. So the actual transformation periods are very rapid, but what happens either side of them is kind of a stable regime once you get to the other side. So systems change can take a long time to work on that very fundamental level of changing mental models, changing systemic structures. But when that actually comes into effect and starts to be expressed, it can be expressed very rapidly. If we think about the whole idea of sustainability, that's been around for a long time, but it hasn't really come into effect until the last decade or so, right? And now big things are changing there. Or the thing around smoking in some countries, the idea of not smoking being bad has been there for a long time, but now it's really starting to kind of kick in, and that mental model is starting to change, that smoking, really isn't a good thing, and a lot of people are quitting. So when you actually change those systemic structures, like the way people are thinking about smoking or sustainability, you can start to get quite rapid transition and transformation process. Yeah, and then on the other side of it, linear change. Hopefully that makes sense, Danielle. There you go.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions? Let's see here in the chat. So would you say incremental changes can lead to transformational change?
Yeah, good question. I'm not sure. I don't think so. I mean, linear incremental changes are normally associated with changes in parts and a kind of planned approach to change. I mean, that's one aspect of this, that if something is incremental and it's building upon itself, then it's very easy for us to predict and control and plan that process out. And those system changes never come about by planned processes of change. They're emergent phenomena of the way a system has reorganized itself. So if we go back, Danielle's asking about the pace of change there. If we think about the fall of the Berlin Wall, well, we know that the USSR for a long time was changing, right? Underneath the hood, it still had that same kind of representation of, being the USSR, but we knew things were changing a lot underneath that in terms of where it was going, the direction, and so forth. But then the Berlin Wall fell, and incredibly quickly, the system fell to pieces, right? So quite often transformations have these kind of critical moments where there's a really quick shift. There's a big period leading up to that of slow fundamental change. Then you get these tipping points, right? The Arab Spring is another example, or you get this exponential change, this feedback loop, and then you're into a new kind of regime. Yeah.
Good. We can
you change without a changed mindset? You can't get real system change without changing the way people think. So Airbnb is an example, right? That is in some sense, it's a system change. They're changing the structure of that, right? They do rewire the way that people transact and exchange temporary accommodation. But ultimately, we know that that hasn't actually led to addressing the wicked challenges we have, right? If Airbnb were really a systems change, they would have helped us address the wicked complex challenges we have around homelessness, around cost of accommodation and housing crisis and all these things. They haven't, right? Because they're not really interested. Their thinking isn't that way. Their thinking is traditional commercial kind of thinking. So if you really want a systems change, then you certainly, that's where it comes from, changes in thinking, yeah, as well as structures.
Great. Yeah, I think we can go to the exercise now. Let me share my screen again. So it's just to, sorry, just go back to the mirror board. Joss, would you like to share your screen? Okay, great. Yeah, so just to have a better understanding of if you got these concepts and you understood them, I put here a few examples of some types of change, and you can drag the eyes if you think that's an incremental change, or you can drag the S if you think that's a structural change. So just think about these examples and let us know if you think that that's an incremental change or it's structural change. And yeah, you can add other examples that you think are missing on the chat, and we can add these ones as well. Just for a few seconds. Okay, any other examples that you can think of? Yeah, feel free to add them on the chat as well. But okay, so let's come back to this exercise since there are a lot of dots here. And let's see, so the change from sleeping to being awake, you've identified as being a structural change. So any of you would like to say, why do you think that's a structural change? No.
It's a paradigm shift in your consciousness, isn't it? Your whole, well, your whole body, really, right? Your energy distribution and usage, energy level of your entire body and your consciousness.
Yeah. What about?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Yes, so go, Valerie, please.
I just wanted to say if the structure changes, if it doesn't go back.
sorry, you're asking if when it's a structural change, it doesn't go back.
No, I would just
Yeah.
say it is a structural change when it cannot be returned.
Yeah. So a systems change would normally be an irreversible process, as you say, right? We could never go back to the Middle Ages. You know, we can, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, we couldn't go back there. Many processes of phase transitions in complex systems are irreversible. When you have like an ecosystem nutrification in a lake ecosystem and it collapses, it can't be reversed. So it's true. System change would normally be irreversible.
Right. Let's see other examples here. Maybe just one more so we can advance. Liquid water to ice. You're saying here there's a structural change. Any of you would like to comment?
Well, it's a well-known example of a phase transition, and it's an interesting one because it is a structural change, right? And the interesting aspect of it is that system under those different regimes, right, a liquid versus a solid, have manifest different properties and features, right? So interestingly, you can't crack water; you can only crack ice. Although the molecules of both are exactly the same, it's the way that system is organized. We know that ice is in a particular structure that's different from a fluid water. That means it makes sense to say that we crack ice. It does make sense to say that we crack water. So it manifests itself, has different functionality and different behavior in those different regimes, even though the parts of it are exactly the same. It's the way that they're organized. It's the regime that's actually governing the whole thing that gives it different capacities and functions and behavior.
Yes, Anna is saying here, different dynamics in the whole nature and behaviors, and Colin saying water to ice has different bonds amongst the elements, right? Great.
I guess the
awesome.
seed to flower is a good example of an irreversible process, right? Flowers in themselves can't go back to seeds.
Yeah, exactly. So moving forwards in the next block. Yeah, for some of you are asking here if this exercise is going to be available. Yes, we're going to leave that in the Miro board so you can come back and review it afterwards. Okay. So yeah, so in the next one, here we have some characteristics of the transitions, and when we talk about systems change and structural change, these are some of the features that we can identify, right, that we've talked a bit during this presentation. So it is a structural change, so it involves change in the system's structure, as you've mentioned before here as well. It's a non-linear change, so it's a process that grows or decays at an exponential rate. And as you're saying that it doesn't come back, right? As you're saying about the seed and the awaken to sleep state, it's this type of change that is exponential. It's a qualitative, and the change is primarily a change in quality rather than quantities, as we've talked before. And one feature that I think is very important to consider, and something that I find very, let's say, enlightening to actually think about, is that it's unsustainable. So as it's saying here, the process is inherently unsustainable, marked by various forms of crisis. So in the same way that we're talking about the caterpillar in that cocoon, the caterpillar couldn't get any bigger, or the transformations couldn't continue to be in the way that it was, and it wasn't sustainable to continue like that. So that change had to happen in order for it to become a butterfly, right? And we can see that in different examples as well, in seeds, right? There's an unsustainability that is inherent to that change that I think it's very important to consider and to think about when talking about systems change, right?
Yeah, we always see these kind of crisis moments, don't we? Like in financial systems, when we hit those financial crises, and there's this very brief period of rapid change, and then something different can come out the other side. Yeah, or even those transitions in life, we see it, you know, when we reach a midlife crisis or something like this, there's always that crisis there when the system collapses. And that's because the whole of the system is kind of collapsing in some sense. And we call that a crisis, right? When the whole of the system is collapsing, not just one part of it. And we experience the unsustainability that we can't go on doing what we did in the past, right? And obviously we kind of see that in our world at the moment as we move out of the industrial age. All of that kind of paradigm, we're starting to realize it's unsustainable. We can't go on with it. We need something qualitatively different. And we also see all these exponential changes, don't we? A lot of crises happening around us. We also see kind of exponential growth in technology in different areas. So that's just to pick up on some of those characteristics.
Awesome. Okay, so we can continue here in this presentation. Since we're talking about change and transformation, the future is a very important thing to consider when we're talking about these topics. And as systems changers, why do you think it's important to think about futures and foresights, and yet looking beyond that that context of the change that we're witnessing? You can post your stickies around here, or you can use the chat or unmute yourself and just comment. Why do you think it's important to talk about the futures in this context? So we have Stan saying to not perpetuate or cause harm.
Yeah, the system is going to do what it's designed to do, you know, so if we care anything about like having a different future from what exists right now, then, you know, you have to change the system. There has to be some systemic changes in order to have like the type of future you want to have. Otherwise, it's going to continue to do as it's been doing. If not, if you think it's bad, let's say it's bad, then it may continue to get worse. If you think it's good, you know, maybe it might get better. But.
Yeah. And the aspect of imagination, I think, is what you're getting at. If we stay with the same thinking, we're just going to perpetuate it. But in considering the future and stories about the future that we craft and tell ourselves, we can create alternative visions, alternative narratives that we can start to bring into being through believing in them, through well, we first have to create them, right? And it's a new space, isn't it? Something new to emerge. And the future doesn't exist, right? So it is that space where we project our imagination onto what could be and our aspirations on what could be. Some people in the system will think about the future in a very much the same way as it is at the moment, because they kind of want it to be, and they lack that imagination. There'll be others who do want systems change and will use it as a space for crafting new visions and stories about the future. And then part of the system change is about bringing that into being. And realizing the change through creating those new stories of the future.
Yeah, exactly. As Wen is saying here, we can't create what we can't imagine. A very, very good quote. Raji is asking, how does history of the system come in them?
Yeah. What role does it play? A very important one. It kind of sets the conditions for what's possible now. I think you see at these, you have to consider it when trying to change it. Yes. I think history plays a really crucial role in terms of what's the story, what's the identity, what's the pathway, what's happened in the past that's actually accumulated to where we are now and created the conditions we're in now. It also sets the conditions for the future. So you're saying, how does history of system come into and play into transformational change? I think it's a lot of the history gets revealed when you come to a transformational period. In terms of the set of opportunities that are available to you at that time.
Yeah, so there's some comments here. Let's read some of those. To be able to really make changes, they are not only symptoms treating. In my context, there are many development issues to be addressed. Change for better living conditions. To not perpetuate or cause harm, to consider the desired future and shape the system towards that. That's a good one. Various systems are interconnected. Continuing or compartmentalized worldview will perpetuate our current problems. Okay. Yeah. When paradigm changes, future needs to be considered.
Current processes, current processes have serious impacts in near and distant future. To be aware of consequences of our decisions, ways of living, and production. Yeah, there are these times that are very critical and kind of formative in shaping systems, aren't they? We know. Well, a bit like when a volcano explodes and you have all that lava flowing out, and it's only for a short period that it's in such flux. And then we know it kind of solidifies, and we can end up in very long periods of kind of stability or relative stability afterwards. Maybe the formation of our modern financial systems that took place maybe 100, 200 years ago. And then we've lived within that dominant paradigm for a very long time. And of course, it's difficult to change once you're in a dominance regime like that. Should we stay going, Yasmin?
Yeah.
So this is setting the stage for talking a bit about futures and foresights, which are systematic and systemic processes or tools and methods for thinking about the future, for framing and forming possible scenarios for the future, to gain insights into the best actions to take today in the present. So it's trying to, this idea of using the future as an asset, that the future, I kind of touched upon it there, it's a space that certainly doesn't exist yet, right? The past is already done and the present exists, but the future doesn't exist. And all it is really our imagination about what it could be. And we can use it. We can fail to have imagination, and we can just perpetuate what exists, right? And quite often what happens, but we can also use it as an asset, use a strategic asset to craft a story about what we'd like to bring into being, and then a pathway for trying to move there. So it can be a platform for enabling systems change. So my internet's a little bit unstable, but and that's an important aspect of this as an asset for creating something very different in the system. The possibility, that's all it is originally, when you have that conception of something different, and then having people believe in that in some way and working to bring it into being, which is how almost all change happens, right? If we think about starting a startup, at the beginning, Google or Tesla, these were just an idea, right, about what was possible, and then eventually they become, the massive systems that they are. And that's the same for our modern world. Actually, there were some people back in the 1300s, Galileo, Newton, these people who started thinking about very differently and what was possible. And ultimately, we've created that system. So that's what I mean about stories and alternative visions of the future, create something different. So is my internet okay, Yasmin, or any problems?
It seems crackling a bit, but it's okay now.
So I'll just turn off my camera. So part of that is thinking about the future as an open space, right? We often think in quite a linear way about the future, that there's kind of a finite set of possibilities and it's going to be a continuation of the past. And we do a lot of analysis of the past and project that onto the future, and that's fine during normal periods of change. But when there is a transformation, the future unfolds in many different ways. There's a much greater uncertainty, and complexity theory kind of encourages us to think in a more expansive way about this idea of futures. There's a plural there, but there may be many different futures, and it depends on what we believe in and what we work to bring into being. So it's trying to move away from this deterministic, reductive kind of analytical approach to understanding the future, that if we just figure it out, there's one right answer, to thinking there's a lot of potential futures, and it's about what we believe in and what we work to bring into being that will actually be what plays out in practice.
Yes, so very, very quickly, Valerie is asking, what is the difference of futuring to intention setting?
I'm not sure with intention setting, difference between futuring and to intention setting. I'm not sure about intention setting. Futures is a whole body of ideas about how to, as mentioned, in quite a systematic and systemic way, think about what the future might hold and how it might play out. There are a number of different tools like the one we're looking at here. Intention setting, I imagine that's just a group of people setting intentions, but not so familiar with that. Yeah.
Okay, so yes, just said, we're going to present an overview of three frameworks to understanding change and how that takes place. And this first one here, unfortunately, we won't be able to do 30 minutes, but we are going to break you out into breakout rooms to discuss about this framework here. That it's basically one way to understand how transformation takes place. And here we have three main like agents, let's say. There are or forces, they are in place when some type of transformation is occurring. But we have a very quick and engaging video here that it's explaining that in a very, very dynamic and fun way that we are going to watch. It's just 6 minutes, so we can watch that now before we break you out into breakout rooms, and then I will explain better the breakout rooms. So you could play that very quickly.
I'm not sure how good my internet is. You might want to grab it if there's an issue, but we'll give it a try.
Okay.
Yeah, you might want to, sorry, try it on your.
What are the challenges you're trying to solve? Perhaps you want to change the food system or make your business carbon neutral, or maybe you just want to figure out how your school or local council can be more inclusive. Whatever it is, incremental changes probably won't be enough. There's a tension between improving what's working today and the need for radical transformation. So how do we make radical change actually happen? This is where Three Horizons can help. In any conversations you have about changing the future, you'll probably notice 3 perspectives showing up. There's the voice of the manager who is responsible for the success of the current system and keeping things going as they are, the visionary who speaks for a radically different world, and the entrepreneur who is impatient with all the talk and just wants to put new ideas into action right now. As you'd expect, these 3 voices are often talking past each other. They don't always realise that each is needed to create meaningful change. So we need a way to discuss the future that brings these 3 perspectives together in a constructive way, one that recognises the value of each and gives us shared language for working together. This is what 3 Horizons is for. It's a simple framework to help guide conversations about the future towards meaningful action. 3 Horizons is like a map. It helps us work out where we are, where we want to be, and how to get there. It may not provide all the answers, but like a map, it gives us a sense of direction. It starts with 2 lines on a page. Along the bottom there's time, beginning in the present and heading into the future. The other axis shows which pattern or system is dominant at any one time. Horizon 1 is business as usual. It's the way we do things today. If we are having a 3 Horizons conversation, it's because we see that the current system is showing signs of strain and is no longer fit for purpose. Let's use an example. Say we're thinking about how we produce our food. Today, we have a highly industrialised food and farming system. While this has increased crop yields and fed millions more people, many aspects of the current approach aren't working and are actively harmful to the soil, water and biodiversity on which we depend. Now let's jump to Horizon 3. This represents the visions that we hold and the visionary people who hold them. Some of the ideas here may seem unrealistic from the perspective of H1, but we know that fringe ideas can become mainstream as conditions change. So, in our food example, we can see many people pursuing a vision of a nature-positive approach to food production, one that provides enough food for everyone while nurturing soil health, restoring biodiversity, and sustainably managing our ecosystems. In the middle is Horizon 2. This is the space of the entrepreneur, where we transition from our current H1 system to the new H3 system we want to create. This is a messy and turbulent space of innovation and disruption, where people are trying out new things, seeing what works, and competing to be the future. Not all innovation will automatically help us bring about the new vision we want. Some will be used to sustain business as usual, offering a sticking plaster for problems rather than solving them. Others will carry us forward into H3, and perhaps a few will be ambiguous. With food and farming, new technology like drones can be used to reduce harm from excessive use of things like pesticides, herbicides, and artificial fertilizers. From the perspective of H3, we call efforts like this H2- innovations, because even though they're improving current practices, it's also just extending the life of H1 and may even delay progress to H3. On the other hand, practices like agroforestry show how food production and nature can coexist, with animals, trees, crops and soil each supporting the health and productivity of the others. We call these innovations the growth points of our third horizon vision, H2+. This framework starts the conversation between the voices of the 3 horizons and helps us build a map on any topic of concern, so you can identify where you are, where you want to be, and most importantly, how to get there. As part of a 3 horizons discussion, you might draw it up big on a wall, adding post-its to the different horizons, or simply use it as a structure to guide your conversation. In H1 we ask, what are the signs that the pattern or system we have today are no longer fit for the future? And what are the values and practices helping to prop up that current system? In H3 we ask, what visions of the future are there? What values are we going to stand for? And how can we collaborate with others to make our vision a reality? And in H2, what innovations are already disrupting things, and how can we help them grow? Which innovations do we need to make sure aren't just captured, H2-, and which ones will be growth points of the future system we want, H2+. There's now a growing network of policymakers, business leaders, researchers, philanthropists, and community organisers who are all using Three Horizons to help them have better conversations about the future and get into action. If you want to jump in, visit futurestewards.com/.
Great. So hopefully that was a good explanation of this Three Horizon framework. And this is a bit of what we're going to do in these breakout rooms. So we don't have much time to go into details and to, as the video is saying, posting stickies around and just go into more specifics on this framework. We're going to use that as a background for our discussion. And here I've identified the topics that you've voted in the beginning of the session to create this space for you to identify in these topics, for example, the education, which voices are talking right now. So what are the aspirational voices that you can identify in the topic of finance, for example? What are the business as usual voice in here? What are the predominant and dominant systems there are currently in the finance topic? And then lastly, what are the disruptive innovations that you can identify at the moment in the topic that you can identify in these boxes? So you can use that as a guidance to just to talk with your peers. I'm going to create these rooms, these breakout rooms now. So you can jump into one if you want to talk about governance, and two if you want to talk about education and so forth. And yeah, we're going to give 10 minutes for that. And then we're going to come back and just share and just read a couple of stickies and share main ideas that you could identify in the breakout room. Okay, does it make sense? Yeah, okay. So we have 1, governance, 2, education, 3, food, 4, design, 5, organizations, and 6, finance. Okay. I'm going to create the 6 breakout rooms here. And you can choose the room. So 10 minutes for a general discussion on these 3 voices, and then we're going to come back and share some main insights that you thought it was useful during your conversations, okay? See you soon. Yeah, so next week we're going to talk about the tools, so we're going to have more time to discuss some of the tools here and have more time for you to share with your peers more of your ideas and interests, okay? That was just to see if you understand a bit more of this module. So we can quickly just share 2 more modules with you and before we wrap up the session. So let me go back. Yeah, since we don't have much time, we can just continue with the modules. All right, so let me share my screen again, and I'll let Josh do the talking. Josh? Oh. He's not here at the moment. Sorry, let me try to find Josh. But in the meantime, maybe we can come back here and then just explore one of those while he's not here. Maybe one, just share a bit about this food one. So let's see what we have here. So business as usual. We have meat-based food system, right? Production far from consumption, and production much bigger than consumption. Okay, so any of you who participated in the food breakout room would like to share a bit on that?
Maybe I can just say that the food system we have right now is very mondialized. Like, how do you say that? Then I'm not sure the word in English, but it's, you know, comes from everywhere around the world, and there's a lot of waste from point A to point B where it's delivered, and we have you know, it's great to have all this food that comes from all over the world, but at the same time there's a lot of waste, and this waste is not, you know, used. It's lost fertility, it's lost soil, it's a lot of loss, and it compounds with time, creating a very unsustainable situation.
Sure. Yeah, maybe the word there is globalized. And
globalized, yes.
Yeah, that's actually very true. We can find, yeah, bananas in the UK, you know, in wintertime, which is crazy, right? And the whole process through which these products come to other countries and to other places requires a lot of transportation, and then you have the amount of food that is necessary to produce, right? You we're saying here production much bigger than the consumption. So the amount of, as you're saying, waste, and so much going on there.
It's also less quality. It's also a loss of quality because we harvest very early, and there's no respect for the normal cycle, the normal you know, the cycle that we need to have very tasty but nutritional food also.
Sure, definitely. So then you can identify some of the aspirational voices here. So what are some of those? Higher nutrient-rich food. So as you're saying, the quality of the food that we have now is very low, and then the aspirational voice, the desired future, would be having food with a higher nutrient, you know, density, right?
Totally.
I think our agriculture as ecosystems. Yes.
Yeah, just saying there's also one thing that is implied is that locally food that is produced locally is inevitably of better quality because there's a lot less transportation. It's produced in the environment where it's needed. So it produces what is needed by the people there to be healthy, and there's a lot less waste.
Yeah. Then you have here, think of agriculture as ecosystems producing more than food, like fuel and medicine. Yeah, 100%. Right. Let's say the alternative ways to use what we call food, right? But the actual resources that are based for a lot of the things that we do, and that can definitely be turned into fuel and medicine, as you're saying here. And good quality food is a medicine in itself, right? You don't need to have external pills or medicines to actually replace that when you replace your bad health, let's say, when you have a good quality food, a good diet, right? So in a lot of ways that the type of food that we have is the medicine itself. So, okay, so what you identified as the disruptive innovations that you can see here: regenerative farming, plant-based diets, and education, diet and food waste. Would you like to speak more about that?
Yeah, so one of the things we were talking about, it's around education, would be more towards behavior change. So you educate people around diet to implement more like plant-based and more balanced diet, because it has been proved that it's a much more sustainable production than the meat-based one. So bringing some balance would be good for health and also for the planet. But also, yeah, around food waste, so connected with we produce much more than we consume. So it's not even that the production it's unsustainable, but a lot of things just go to waste. What's a shame.
Definitely, yeah, and that goes into the educational part of it, people understanding about the consequences of waste and alternative ways to deal with what we call waste, right? Doesn't need to actually, can recycle, you can do some other things. So anyway, yes, very, very good. Thank you for sharing that. That was just one example of how we can see these three voices at play. So we can move on very quickly to the last two models that we're going to cover today here.
Great, thanks, Yasmin. Yeah, so just take a look at some models here. We saw there the Three Horizons framework, which is quite popular for thinking about how change and transformation happens in complex adaptive systems. There are a number of others. The Two Loops model, I'm not sure which one are we planning to do next week, Yasmin? Is it the Two Loops we're going to look at? Or?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So we'll have a chance to look at that one, which is quite popular. Here is an adaptation of one you might have heard of. It's called the multi-level perspective. So again, it's about a transformation, and there are different, again, driving forces in that, right? So at the top level is actually showing the landscape changes, which are big kind of macro changes taking place in the world that are driving change and making it so that the existing system can't continue in its current form. So these could be things like globalization, could be a sustainability crisis, could be the rise of information technology. Changing values in a society would mean that existing ways we've done in the past won't work in the future. So that's the top level, big macro changes, and you can see those playing out. And then in the middle level is about the dominant system. The dominant way, the existing way of performing societal functions, different functions in that system. So it could be corporations, the way we get energy from companies like Exxon Mobil or so forth. That's an incumbent system that's providing us with energy. And it's a particular pattern of organization, a particular way of doing things. On the bottom level is about the new innovations and the so-called pockets of the future, which are, as they imply, these are the new ways of doing things that have the potential to break into the mainstream and disrupt the incumbent system because of these landscape changes. These big changes are creating opportunities for new ways of doing things that the incumbent system can't really capture. And these new innovations may be able to break into the future, build upon that window of opportunity and disrupt the incumbent system. And potentially, if they get nurtured, developed, grown, and interconnected, may ultimately form a new system that we see on the right-hand side there. So it's just kind of marking out some of the different aspects of a transformation. There's always those innovations, there's always that incumbent system, there's those big landscape changes, there's going to be some kind of disruption going on, and hopefully, if we're successful, the emergence of a new system afterwards. You'll find that canvas on our website. It's called the Systems Change Canvas. And then, yeah, this was another one, the two loops model that we'll be looking at next week. And it's a canvas, again, you'll find it on our website, and we'll be learning about this. It's a interesting and very simple model in some ways. It's two loops, and it's trying to describe the simultaneous growth of a new system, which is the lower loop on the bottom right-hand side, and the rise and ultimate decline of the existing system on the top left-hand side. So it's particularly interested in what's that relationship between the incumbent system and the emerging new system, and how do we nourish, name, connect, nourish, and grow the new innovations into a functioning system. But also, how do we create bridges back to the existing system so that those in the existing system actually have pathways into new ways of doing things, this new emerging pattern. So particularly focused on that relationship between the incumbent system that may be decaying and falling to pieces in some way, and the emergence of a new one. And how do we get that, potentially get that working together and synergistically in some way, so the resources from the incumbent system can be redistributed to the emerging one to enable it to grow, and there can be a successful transition in terms of people moving from the incumbent historical way of doing things to the new one through these bridges and through these people who kind of bridge between the old system and the new one.
Great. Yeah, so these were the three modules that we planned for this session. And yeah, as Joss was saying, this two loops module is the one that we're going to cover next week. So we're going to go deeper into each one of these parts of the module, so you can have a better experience on how that looks like in practice, okay? So just to finish off our session and to have some inspiration for you to think about systems change and the idea of futures that we've touched here, I wanted to finish off our session with this quote that change the story and you can change the future. And I think that's a very powerful way to think about systems that we are a part of, and to think about our own journey as well, since we are very complex systems as well as human beings. So yeah, I thought that it could close off our session and express some of the ideas that we've touched upon today, and yeah, get you some food for thoughts during this week. All right, so this is the end of our session. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming. And yeah, as always, we have our next steps here. So as I said, next week, we're going to have tools on systems change. And it's going to be the same place, same time. So you have the link here. It's not a YouTube link. I don't know what happened, but you can just click here and access the next session. You can just RSVP clicking on this link here. So here are ways for you to connect with the London Hub. So you can follow the website just using this link here as well. Here's our LinkedIn channel that we post updates there every day on LinkedIn and on Twitter here as well. And here you have the YouTube link where you can watch this recording, the past recordings that we had during this learning series and other events that we've done previously as well. So you can just click here and watch those videos. And as always, since it's always good for us to improve what we're doing here and give you the best presentations and events that we can, it's a feedback that you can put your sticky notes here and ask these 3 questions. Did you get a good understanding of the concepts today? Was the format of the session effective in helping you understand the contents? And any ideas for how we may improve the way we do this presentation and this event? So you can put your sticky notes here on this line, and we always come back to we always come back to see what you've posted here, and we're always happy to chat and to hear your comments. Okay, so that's the end of today's session. Yes.
And on that note, we can stay an extra 5-10 minutes, myself and Yasmin, if you have any questions you'd like to address to us. I also, Danielle was looking for case studies, and we have some compiled on the website. I put a link there in the chat for you to look at what examples of systems change look like in practice. So you can see them there.
Great.
So thank you all for joining, and great to have your interaction and have this discussion. And look forward to seeing you in the next one.
Yeah, see you next week, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.